Welcome to Dealing with Crap at Work, Lessons from the Farm. I'm Dr. Swan. I work as a general practitioner in oncology based out of the Chalmers Hospital in Fredericton, and I've been here for almost 14 years. I am not famous. I'm relatively boring, and there's probably not much of significance in my biography, so let's move right along. Now, I was told it's always good to start with disclosures. Yep, the NBMS is for some reason allowing me to do this. Regrettably, I've never yet found a way to convince large pharmaceutical industry to pay me really big bucks to talk about poop. I did do this spiel once for the New Brunswick pharmacy techs, and I got a gift card for that, so I'll disclose that. And the clinic where I work participates in trials, but you can be assured that none of them deal with crap, so I'm completely unbiased in that regard. You'll see I will be talking a bit about my cows, and I suppose there may be a conflict there since I make money from them. Now, to clarify, I actually make money from killing them and selling their carcasses. So I would ask that you remember my sadistic tendencies if you're thinking about providing negative feedback at the end of this educational opportunity. In keeping with my next disclosure, I'm nervous as hell. You will be able to tell. Sometimes I will flush, sometimes I will stammer. Why am I nervous? Well, you would think that because I'm here, I have some sort of skill. But that leads to my next disclosure. I have no expertise. None. Nada. Zip. You see, here I am speaking in a sense about resiliency in really difficult situations, and yet I'm not a wellness expert. I'll tell you a little secret. I don't always do all of the things that I tell other people that they should. You know, sometimes I eat junk and I drink, and I'm not always mindful. I occasionally make presumptions. I can let anger build a bit. And in fact, sometimes I'm mindless. On top of that, not only am I not an expert on wellness in crisis, quite frankly, I'm not even a good presenter. Now, you'll see, I tend to read directly from my cue cards. I've mangled some clip art cows today. I struggle with advancing the slides. I'm from rural New Brunswick, and I'm not even sure if I'm using the proper grammar, and I swear. But it's going to be okay, because I'm telling you, as I'm reminding myself, that I'm not here as an expert presenter today. I'm not even really presenting at all. No, all I am here is as a colleague and a storyteller. I'm going to do something quite different. All I'm going to do is tell you random stories about my farm. I'm not going to make you get up and do jumping jacks. I'm not going to ask you to write insightful comments down or write anything down. All you really have to do is get comfortable, sit back, and just listen to my ramblings. Now, you can take as much or as little from this time as you choose. You can read into extensive hidden meaning within the stories, or just take them simply at face value. Now, I'm sure a really good storyteller would start with something better than a cliche, but here it is. Shit happens. And as the title of this session implies, there are times in life when people feel absolutely bombarded by crap. Now, maybe a very good example. Now, a little over a year ago, I noticed that people were already tending to talk about a lot of crap at their work. Staff, family, friends, even patients. There were limitations on time, increasing work demands, sometimes changes in management, loss of colleagues, financial constraints, etc. And now, here we are, facing a public health crisis that I'm not sure many of us would have ever predicted even when I first started working on this piece. The previously listed problems may be even amplified now in this scenario. Now, many employees report workplace stress as the primary cause of their mental health problems, which are usually depression and anxiety. I sometimes wonder whether it causes it or whether it's a promoting factor, and perhaps it's a question of whether the chicken came before the egg or vice versa. But regardless, this emotional turmoil subsequently impacts our workplace productivity and our quality of life. Now, as a physician, I had already been told that I have picked a career that has one of the highest suicide rates around. I'd heard in the news in the past about the alarmingly high rates of doctors killing themselves and the concerns about stigma associated with asking for help. We've experienced loss of our own colleagues in this manner. And as I told you before, I work in oncology, and I'm told that the practice of oncology presents several unique work-related issues that contribute to the mental health of its healthcare professionals and contribute to things like burnout, depression, and suicide. Now, granted, it seems like a lot of our time in oncology and now worldwide is spent thinking about suffering and death, and that's all been amplified by COVID. There are many reasons that I fell into farming, and I'd like to think that it helps me to remain well-rounded and distracted from hospital work. I don't think I'm stumbling upon something novel. I've heard that other doctors do this too. Farming seems like an honorable way to spend spare time. Connect with nature, continue to try to provide care for creatures, problem solve, be creative, contribute to society's well-being. Unfortunately, I've discovered two more things. Number one, farming also involves thinking about suffering and death sometimes. And number two, farming is also stressful, and apparently it also has an extremely high suicide rate. Mental health issues have been coming to the forefront in the farming industry, and as more people are starting to speak out about that. Once again, farmers seem to be another select population that fears stigma associated with emotional turmoil. Public awareness regarding these issues is important, but in the same breath, I'll acknowledge sometimes I feel like we can be inundated with catchphrases and marketing regarding mental health. Television ads and social apps remind us about the importance of it, and yet it's not quite as common to see specific tips or techniques provided to aid us all and help us develop coping strategies. Now, some people may be born with this thing called tremendous resilience. However, others may not, just like athleticism. Some people may have a natural gift for it, but others may require a coach and a bit of practice. It doesn't mean they can't be athletically competent, they may just have to practice a bit more. Now, I suspect that some people are superstars at dealing with certain stressful issues at work. However, not likely superstars in every single situation. And this pandemic may be a real eye-opener. After all, just because you are a brilliant athlete at football does not mean you are going to be brilliant at high diving. Some people may require tips and coaching about how to deal with specific scenarios at work. And many of us are spending a lot of our time there. In theory, we should feel well when we're there. So in one ear, we hear that we should prioritize our own mental and physical health and try to get motivated and make ourselves the best that we can be. But sometimes work can be a real challenge. And in the other ear, we hear that we may not be able to access additional resources to help us. We may not be able to take vacations now. It may be hard to find time to incorporate regular exercise. Employees may be asked to take on additional workload to account for lack of manpower, or physicians may be struggling to even keep their clinic open. So is it really helpful to have one more person reminding you right now that work can be crappy? I mean, really, why am I here? Well, the simple answer is, I am here because my husband snores. Now I can tell you're wondering where the hell I'm going with this, so hang in here. You see, my husband snores so badly that many nights he wakes me up. And a couple of years ago, he woke me up one night, and for the only time in history, please don't ever tell him this. Something good may have happened from my husband snoring. You see, I moved to the couch because I had to get away from the noise, and by then I couldn't immediately get back to sleep. So I tossed and I turned, and I started having some pretty random weird thoughts. Now, it may not be terribly unusual that I thought about work. I think many people can in the middle of the night. And at that time, I had been noticing that the oncology staff in the clinic where I am employed, they were all brewing with a bit of tension regarding some ongoing adjustments. You see, we had just received a notice that our oncology clinic was going to be moved off-site in order to proceed with hospital construction. Now, with increasing work demands, increasing patient volume, medically and emotionally challenging patients, high staff turnover, and now the possibility of further changes to the work environment, it seemed like crap was building at a rate we could not contain. I wondered, how could we deal with it all? Could I come up with a solution? And as a salaried physician, I felt like a lot of factors were out of my control. And admittedly, even if everything was in my control, would I even know how to handle that situation? After all, hospital construction, it needed to proceed. Now, I already told you that I'm not an expert, and I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about why humans act or react the way we do. I'm not going to pretend to be proficient at human psychology. I'm not going to pretend to know everything about stress. I'm certainly not going to pretend to have stellar expertise in running organizations or corporations. But as I lay awake on the couch that night, I remembered that since I own a farm, at least I understand crap. I have had the personal advantage of working with lots and lots and lots of crap. So, since I have some experience with crap, I wondered if I could at least try to help figure out how to deal with it at work. And as I thought about this, I realized that I have experience in dealing with different types of crap. Pig crap, cow patties, horse shit, sheep balls, dog poop, chicken slime, the list goes on and on. I'm going to dive into some shitty philosophy here. When you think about it, different types of crap may need different processes to deal with it. For example, chicken manure contains higher levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium than cattle, sheep, or horse manure. Now, some state that it's better for gardens, whereas horse manure has a lot of weed seeds and it takes longer to age in compost. Maybe what we initially perceive as crap could be occasionally valuable. The value may not be realized right away. In truth, sometimes the crap needs to be left alone and aged for a while before you may think of a way to repurpose it in a meaningful fashion. So maybe we should not try to eliminate all of the crap around us. Maybe it's okay when we're inundated with crap. We just need to learn how to process it properly. Now, another thing that I remembered is that on a farm, exposure to crap happens at a young age. Well, this may be good. Children don't seem to have any preconceived notions about what is crap and what isn't. At first, it's novel, but eventually they just learn that they shouldn't play in it. In other words, there really is no need to wallow in crap or be overly dramatic about it. You should probably acknowledge that it's there and then work with it. I've noticed that some of us occasionally have tendencies to keep mucking about in it, even if we aren't actually achieving anything or going anywhere. It may be fun initially, but we might need to occasionally remind ourselves to grow up in such circumstances. On farms, children are eventually taught how to deal with the different types of crap they may encounter. They learn that some crap should be treated carefully. Determining what crap is the best takes a bit of finesse and experience. And as we've already identified, different types of crap have different purposes. But it isn't just the type that matters. No, no, no. Other factors are important too. For example, if you put manure on the garden when the manure is too hot, it's going to destroy your plants. You need to learn patience. And you need to learn when to intervene and when you shouldn't. That takes a bit of guidance and experience. You may learn from educating yourself by reading, or you may learn from watching others' successes and mistakes. But the key is that the education keeps occurring, and we need to keep promoting education. Children on farms also learn that some crap should simply be thrown out. It doesn't seem to serve any current purpose. And that's why farms have manure piles downwind behind the barns. You don't want this type of manure to build up inside. It will make a mess in your barn, and ultimately you won't be as functional, and your farm won't be as healthy and productive. As the pile behind the barn grows, it may start to appear daunting. It may even cast a shadow on the farm, may attract rodents and other creatures that seem to enjoy crap and will constantly remind you about it. But children learn that if they create healthy surrounding environments, the rodents tend to stay away. You may still have that manure pile, but you can shape it and contain it. Now, eventually, children see something quite amazing that occurs intermittently on farms. Farmers can actually get excited about the height of that steaming pile behind the barn. They jump into their machines, decimate that crap, and spread it on the fields in small, manageable amounts. Sometimes breaking things down into smaller components makes it much easier to deal with. These small little crumbs encourage growth, and they're blessed with a wonderful hay crop or pasture next year. Now, as they grow, children on farms are taught how to deal with crap through the different stages of their lives. When they get bigger, sometimes they are forced to deal with larger and larger amounts of crap. But I've noticed on farms that as children grow, they are also increasingly capable of maneuvering larger and larger wheelbarrows. And then one day you see them driving tractors. And ultimately, if you provide them with the right tools, they can still manage that extra crap. So just as a PS, those previous slides were all pictures of my son, who was born very premature, and he's been forced to push crap, but now he likes to deal with it like that. So here we are as adults at work, and perhaps we've missed a lot of opportunities to manage shit as a youngster. We may lack some education about it, or perhaps we know a bit about it, but we're struggling right now to find the correct tools currently to help. Maybe we don't all have access to multiple wheelbarrows. What should we do? Well, we could watch others. We could try to learn tricks we could apply. Maybe we could try to research and educate ourselves. But what about those of us that say we simply don't have time or energy to embark upon all of that? We're exhausted. We feel like we're overwhelmed. The hypothetical shit philosophy I've just spouted is really cute, but it doesn't necessarily give specific tips. The work crises or imposing stress is imminent, and we simply may not have time to do all of that perfectly well. What should happen then? Well, maybe we should act like cows. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a cow. Why should we act like cows? You see, during the midst of those proposed changes in our oncology clinic, as I lay there on the couch that night escaping my snoring husband, I remembered something I had witnessed cows do on my farm. Now, I recognize this is where it gets weird, but if we truly analyze many sleep-deprived thoughts in the middle of night, they may fall well outside the spectrum of normal. So sometimes we may need to act like cows. For some of us, that will be easier than others. I mean, after all, a few of us are quite capable of sauntering around, laying in the sun all day, eating. We all have niches and skill sets. That being said, I suspect that some people at work would have great difficulty acting like cows because they are actually, indeed, asses. Now, this is my ass, and I always promise to incorporate a picture of my ass in speeches to keep your attention. So, some people at work are definitely asses. Keep listening. I mean this as a compliment. These asses of our workplace are our donkeys. They sense when something is afoot long before the rest of the employees have heard about it. They may hear snippets of gossip. They may notice the weather before anyone else. They hear the news reports, government updates, social media events first. Simply put, they are always in the know. Now think about it. You know someone around you who's probably just like that. They are the coworker that tells you about road closures before you've even left work. And just as I've witnessed on my farm, the donkeys alert to something, their ears move forward, they face the direction in which the event is occurring, and they may bray. Generally, they always get the other animal's attention. Now, this can be integral in helping maintain proper flow and function of the farm. The donkeys that bray at new changes and potential danger can be very helpful. The donkeys that bray at everything are, as you guessed, just a pain in the ass. Now, as I've also witnessed on my farm, once the donkey alerts to something new, one cow may notice and spread the alert notification and may moo to another cow. And in turn, this cow may moo and grab some other's attention. The message is spread until all the cows understand that something new has developed. Now, sometimes the threat is quite easy to deal with. A few heifers may line up in a row, and watch as a jogger passes on the road. Quite often, the bull will raise his burly head and stomp off to the fence line to watch a stopped car. In fact, the cows have become so efficient at dealing with certain common threats that they rely on these niche positions that certain herd members complete, and the others maintain efficiency and they often just keep grazing. Now, other times, the cows have figured out that they may need some help from upper management, the farmer. This can occasionally be challenging, but on my farm, I am convinced that they have figured out that if they moo more, this will sometimes get the farmer's attention. Now, I also suspect that my cows have learned that if they cooperate and they moo in unison, this is particularly annoying and it will often bring the farmer. I've seen this tactic used occasionally if a calf is stuck on the wrong side of the fence. Now, I've also noticed that this cooperative strategy, multiple employees saying the same thing, tends to gain more attention at work as well. Now, I'm going to tell a story about something I remembered witnessing on my farm early one summer morning when the cows were faced with an immediate, intense threat. Now, it started when a donkey alerted. In fact, I first noticed the story unfolding because as I gazed out my kitchen window, I wondered why all the animals had stopped eating and they were all facing the same direction. And when I followed their gaze, I saw the coyote. He was boldly sauntering right through the cow pasture. What do you think the cows did next? Well, the cows started to walk around until I realized that they had rounded up the calves into a rough circle. Then they positioned themselves around that circle of calves. The adult cows were all oriented such that their hindquarters were facing inside the circle and their heads were facing out. Why do you think they did that? Well, the first thing that came to my mind was that they were protecting the calves. This was the vulnerable population. In healthcare, we always need to be conscious of this vulnerable patient population. And by circling around the calves, nothing could get in. And therefore, I suppose another benefit was that nothing could get out. Usually, most healthcare providers do not need to be reminded to be attentive to the needs of patients. After all, many healthcare corporations and many businesses in general are surviving based on the moral integrity of its providers to often fill many gaps. However, when a new threat to routine is imposed, it may be easier to forget about the vulnerable in the midst of chaos. With this circle formation, it's also interesting to note that when a new immediate threat was first determined, the cows first looked after themselves. In a sense, they rallied their strength. I'm left to wonder, as humans, do we always do this? Well, some individuals are intensely invested in self-betterment. They eat large amounts of turmeric and moon dust, practice floating yoga, take part in cycle karaoke. They constantly wear their waist trimmers, they invest heavily in their looks, and they try to constantly achieve for perfection. They spend tremendous amounts of time invested in always improving themselves. And that is important. But that might not be the only key to resiliency. I'd also like to point out that the cows were not interested in just their individual greatness now, but rather the strength of their group. It may be easy to become so preoccupied with individual strength that we forget that an individual cow would never be able to form a protective circle on their own. In the era of scrolling on our phones with our eyes averted as we meet in the hallways, we should remember that the cows knew that they still needed to network and surround themselves with other cows. This circle plan seemed reasonable, but as I thought longer about this, I couldn't help but wonder. Why didn't the cows just make a line and put the calves behind them? I mean, after all, they knew exactly where the coyote was. All they really needed to do was make a straight wall of cows between the coyote and the calves. And actually, placing cows on the back side of that circle should have given them a distinct disadvantage because those cows could not watch the coyote, which was already determined to be on the other side. Does that make any sense to you? Well, now some of you may have recognized that assuming this circle position allowed for 360 degrees of surveillance. Although the cows on the backside of the circle could not see the coyote, what could they see? Yes, they could watch for other threats. Do coyotes always travel alone? Do problems happen in a singular fashion? There's a reason that we use the expression, when it rains, it pours. And maybe those clip art cows are smarter than we think. Just because the cows were focusing on dealing with one issue did not mean that they should neglect the potential for other issues to arise as well. Using members effectively in an optimal shape allowed them the opportunity to still have warning and prioritize if needed. Once the cows had established their circle, suddenly a mid-sized black Angus heifer, that's a girl cow, she came abruptly out of the circle and faced the coyote. Now, things were certainly starting to get interesting. I don't know if you are familiar with black Angus cattle, but I have noticed that they seem to have a bit of a pissy look on their face, a sort of a don't fuck with me look. Now, I assumed that this gal just didn't have the patience for the coyote nonsense any longer, and I remembered this black Angus heifer as the one that the other cows seemed to pick on. For example, I had noticed in the past that she was often left out of the barn in the dripping rain with the calves while the other cows ate inside first. We used to joke and nickname her the appointed babysitter. Well, her abrupt break from the circle grabbed the coyote's attention. He looked at her and he paused for a second. And in that single second, I witnessed a lot of new activity. Promptly, two more heifers emerged from the circle and positioned themselves slightly farther behind the first cow. I smirked to myself. Looks like they're all starting to get impatient, I thought. And just as soon as those backup heifers emerged, the leading black Angus suddenly snorted and she leapt high into the air. She crashed down on her front legs and kicked her back legs up, bucking and thrashing, twisting in the air. It really was quite a sight. Well, the coyote didn't take more than that mere second to decide to run, and the Angus started to charge after him. She didn't chase very far or very long, of course, because he was far from her reach by then and headed back into the woods and out of the pasture. I walked away from the window and I never thought much more about that event at the time until the middle of the night, as I awoke and I thought more about the chaos in the oncology clinic. And in the darkness, I started to wonder if I had been far too preoccupied with initially noticing that dramatic heifer outside the cow circle. And perhaps I had made just a few too many assumptions. For example, I assumed that the black Angus heifer had emerged from the circle because she was cranky and aggressive. Now, when she did that, shouldn't it have compromised the integrity of the circle? And yet, when I thought back, I never saw a single calf escape, and I never noticed any gape in that circle. Why? What do you think happened? Well, of course, the other cows simply shuffled positions. And when those two other backup heifers emerged from the circle, what happened? Yes, the cow circle simply shuffled again to close the gaps. And it's also interesting to surmise that in that moment of intense threat, the calves froze and stayed put. And whenever the cow circle shuffled, yet another benefit of that circle shape was that it could spin. Of course, the cows could shuffle and spin their circle however they chose with relatively minimal steps. Ultimately, another important point to acknowledge is that the cows proved that even with a limited number of bodies, they could still protect their vulnerable population. In essence, a smaller circle could still provide protection and even provide an offense as long as it knew how to shuffle and spin. The smaller the circle, the quicker it could, but it also needed to spin. A smaller circle would have to make decisions quicker and therefore potentially even understand its members' skills better. The cows didn't just need to form a circle, they needed to understand one another. That doesn't mean they had to be besties with every single cow. It means they had to be able to objectively assess each cow and identify each cow's unique skill sets. In a game of Survivor, what would each cow be the most useful for? Spin and eject appropriately. So in theory, if the cows could shuffle and spin their circle however they wished, even if we assume that that Black Angus had emerged due to a biological impulse. Why didn't the bull's instinct take over? Why didn't the bull emerge from the circle? I mean, why didn't he protect them, or at least try to protect her? I had seen him stomp at many threats in the past. So what was different this time? In theory, those cows could have fired out any cow that they wanted to. Well, this is only my hypothesis about the answer to that question, and you may say that cows aren't that smart. And most times, as a heifer stands in front of me with bangs hanging as if badly permed, one eye wandering far to the left and one eye wandering far to the right, I would agree with you. However, I have learned that perhaps cows aren't always that smart, but Mother Nature can be. I strongly suspect that biological instincts did prevail in this scenario. What if the Black Angus heifer stepping out from that circle had not been random, though? Since the cow circle could eject any member, what if her exit had been purposeful? Let's think about the threat, the coyote. What skill set does the coyote have that the cows don't have? Definitely speed. I suspect a single coyote could outrun most of our fat beef cattle. Now, what skill set would the bull have? Well, the first word that came to my mind was power. How would a coyote try to kill a cow? Well, I had watched enough nature documentaries that I figure a coyote would likely try to grab a cow's leg and take it down so that it could latch into its neck. Perhaps it's a bit graphic, but I don't think it's terribly far-fetched. What would be the cow's only good defense against the coyote? Ah, yes, a well-placed kick if the coyote got close enough. But that would involve accuracy, timing, and flexibility. Now let's think about what that Black Angus heifer did in the second that the coyote paused. When the coyote paused, the coyote was likely about to think or make a decision. It's very helpful to recognize or be forewarned of this decisive stage at work. And in truth, the heifer's antics only had a meaningful impact at the proper moment. She would have wasted time and energy if she had to perform those antics even 10 minutes earlier. The coyote wasn't even paying attention then. She quickly showed the coyote her skills when it mattered. She kicked, and she kicked high and hard. In a sense, she was making one decision less desirable for him because he was noticing the amount of work that it would take to overcome her kicking skills. She was biasing him and implying that he should cut his losses and run. Now, I naively assumed that this cow was previously made babysitter by the herd due to a low pecking order. But what if she had been made babysitter in the past because she was capable? What if she indeed was the best kicker? What would have happened if the coyote had made the other decision and he had just decided to attack that Black Angus heifer? Now, he may have been eventually successful, but it would have taken him some time and effort. And of course, we must not forget the backup heifers that had emerged. Do you think that their placement was random? If we think back, if the coyote had to attack them as well, where were they placed? He would have had to run back and forth, and every time he had to take down a cow, he may have sustained a few blows, and his heart would have been racing, and his tongue might have started to hang out. Can you see what may have happened? Well, the coyote would have been tiring. And I strongly suspect that the cow circle could have ejected something that may have had the opportunity to overpower the weakened coyote at that point in time. The bull. Because that was the point when power and strength may have been more important. So power may not always be the first way to approach new threats at work. There may be times you don't release a bull in a china shop. Power is only powerful if used in the appropriate context. So hence the cows perhaps had an intricate plan of how to kill a coyote eventually if they had to protect the majority of the herd. I'm not sure if the cows knew it, but I suspect Mother Nature did. Now, sometimes I think we get quite good at trying to maintain our individual efficiency at work. We put on strong faces in front of our patients and we try to help guide them as efficiently and as cleverly as possible. We may even have niche members in clinics or offices that we are pulling out to face certain challenges so the rest of the herd can graze. When necessary, we have learned to work as teams, we've learned to cooperate, and we get very familiar with forming a wall of protection. And as workload increases, vulnerable population increases, manpower diminishes and resources dwindle, we've learned to shuffle back and forth along our wall of protection. Some of us are so good at shuffling that we've actually become quite fast. We can really sprint. Some of us even know who we like to have flanking us, and we may even coordinate our side steps with them. But remember, this is not the same as the cow circle. The real niche of the cow circle was having optimal surveillance and knowing how to move and spin it correctly. So knowing who is behind you is of utmost importance, not just planning who should flank you. All the cows had to know how to shuffle appropriately, or the calves would become unprotected whenever a cow stepped forth with a coordinated plan. They also had to know which cow to use most efficiently so the others could preserve their steps. Knowing skill sets of every cow was imperative. In my story, the cows were successful in dissolving a potential threat before it even became a real threat. But that's because they knew how to intervene with select players at key moments. The coyote ran off and hence likely quickly returned to normal on the farm. But I'd now like to tell another story I remembered, and this story unfolded differently. My husband received a call that our cows were on the loose, and when we drove to the bottom of the dead-end road passing our property, sure enough, there they were, chaotically running around on the neighbor's property. They'd broken out of their pasture, traversed through about a mile of our fields, and eventually passed onto the road. They were worked up and they were mooing frequently. Painstakingly, we ushered them back into our fields and gradually coaxed them home. It didn't take long to figure out the cows had sporadically bolted from something and they had charged through the electric fences. Now, a neighbor from across the road quickly disclosed the problem to us. He had spotted a coyote that morning jogging through our farm, and my husband became suspicious of the events. These cows had not formed their circle, and they simply ran for safety. A quick head count now depicted a problem. We were short one cow. The heifers were all there. It's terribly important to note that it was a calf that was missing, one of the vulnerable population. When healthcare is strained, it can ultimately be the patients that suffer. We searched for days for that calf. The cows continued to be stressed and the farmer was equally distraught. Eventually, the body of our calf was found mangled and eaten by the coyote. On closer examination, it looked like the calf had actually become entangled in barbed wire, and hence it became the coyote's prey after that. That calf had previously lived harmoniously with barbed wire bordering the surrounding field for months. That is, until chaos ensued. It was the act of everyone bolting that ultimately failed the calf. Now, normally on our farm, mother cows will bawl and moo for a couple of days when calves are separated from them for weaning. And yet the mother cow of this dead calf seemed to be distressed for weeks. She mooed so much that the other cows started becoming distressed and started mooing back. And eventually, even cows at a neighboring farm started mooing back. The entire herd continued to be stressed. One can assume that the neighbors weren't impressed either. So it was a ripple effect. For the farmer, this translated into increased costs. We'd lost income from the calf. We'd wasted time and energy searching for the calf. We had a continued threat from more coyotes now that we had a carcass on our property. We were frustrating neighbors and now losing productivity and hence money from the entire herd. So you can read between the lines and see the moral of that story. Now, some people may argue that current events that we see in our work environment are not really like a coyote. In fact, sometimes we don't even know the next step or the next threat's going to be, or if it's even going to be a threat. We just know that a lot of change is afoot. I'll use a strange analogy. Perhaps instead of being farm animals grazing in a pasture and seeing a coyote passing by, we're farm animals sensing a different potential problem. Imagine something like this for a moment. The donkey has alerted to smoke on the horizon. One cow is moved to another and the message is being dispersed. There are many factors to consider, and the cows need to worry about the calves as well. So is a fire going to ravage the farm? Will they lose shelter? Is a fire going to rush wild predators out of the woods towards the farm? Is fire going to destroy the grass and hay that the cows rely upon for food? Ultimately, all the cows have become invested in this potential problem, and they are all eventually mooing, but the farmer in some areas may not initially respond. The cows eventually get organized enough that they start mooing in unison. And ultimately, the farmer and most people in the neighborhood are now paying attention. We should remember that farmers have tough jobs. It isn't easy being in a leadership position. So this hypothetical farmer keeps trying to yell back to the cows that he or she can also see the smoke on the horizon, and yet doesn't think he or she can really fix that. They've already notified 911 and the firefighters are trying to take care of it. The farmer does not perceive much more control over this. The cows continue to moo. The farmer yells back that he doesn't have a good solution. He only has a single horse trailer, and that's not capable of transporting a herd of cattle to a safer place. So equipment issues can really plague all organizations. He explains he doesn't have the money or resources to hire help or to purchase a big, large cattle trailer. The farmer didn't even buy that old horse trailer, and previous farmer bought that, so changes in management can be an issue as well. And even though it may not be the most practical thing on the farm, he or she can't afford to upgrade to something more useful. Financial constraints are always looming. So what should happen in this scenario? There doesn't appear to be an easy fix. Well, if we think back to the initial cow story, maybe the cows should form a circle in this scenario. As already determined, this allows them some protection and support. We have also already determined it gives them 360 degrees of vision to watch for threats. So if they can watch for threats, what else could they possibly see? Now, I like to assume that if they can watch for threats, they can also watch for help. We already know that the cows have developed some adaptive techniques to help with predators over the years, but perhaps they've never encountered fire before. They may need to think differently, and sometimes this involves liberating new ideas, and it involves asking for help of a different kind. I thought about it. Now, what would the cows see on my farm if they had to look around? Well, there's a little shed in the upper cow pasture, and it's surrounded by terrain that sometimes looks like the surface of the moon. And it's enclosed by a little wire fence. Well, let's assume that the cow's 360 degrees of vision allows them to spot that and see pigs that are mucking about up there in that pig pen. Well, the cows always just assumed that the pigs were lazy and fat and probably didn't do much. But the cows need to think differently. What do pigs love to do? Remember that an individual's skill set is often something that they love to do because it's easy for them. Well, I think that pigs like to dig. Allow for some creativity in my story. But if the cows are intuitive, they may convince the pigs to dig a wide trench. And ultimately, a trench may serve as a fire barrier, and it may buy some valuable time. Eventually, might even protect the herd from fire. It's perhaps a silly analogy, but there may be some points that resonate within it. Now, I've thought good and hard about this, and I'm not so idealistic as to ignore the possibility that there may be times when even cows in circles could feel so stretched and feel that they have to spin so quickly that they no longer can keep the enlarging, vulnerable population they're trying to round up contained. In theory, they need to figure out how to make a larger cow circle. But I've noticed that on big cattle ranches, it's not necessarily uncommon to lose a calf to a predator. And I'm strongly suspicious that it's difficult for large numbers of cattle to form a circle, especially if they're spaced out. In this scenario, I suspect the cows may wonder about trying to do something simple. Instead of having to meet and understand skills of many cows, because that seems like a lot of work, perhaps they could just form multiple smaller circles. It would probably be less stressful, take a lot less effort. Each mother cow could simply gather up their own calves. Seems like a reasonable plan. But what happens to the orphan calves? The ones that don't have a mother in a predetermined circle click? In theory, they may be some of the most vulnerable cows around, and they may be rambling in between the circles because the cows aren't really sure where those calves should belong. Well, maybe the cows could form their circles based on color. Brown in one circle, white in one circle, black in one circle. But what about the cows that are a blend or spotted? Well, maybe the cows could form their circles based on skills, circles of expertise. The best kickers, protectors could form one circle. The best milk producers or feeders could form another circle, and so on. But what about the calves that need food and protection? They may not only need one circle. They actually need protectors and feeders, so they would have to move from circle to circle, and when they're transitioning in between, transitioning care, they would be even more vulnerable. Ultimately, the calves really wouldn't be able to stay protected, and none of the cows would be really sure where the calves with multiple needs belong. Transitioning care is where some of the greatest lapses in patient safety can occur in our health system. Well, maybe the adult cows would be able to see little calves transitioning between circles that run into problems. And they could watch to see if the coyote is stalking them. And in that scenario, maybe a bold Angus heifer could pop out of the circle to help. But remember, there is also a well-documented social and psychological phenomenon noted in society entitled the bystander effect, in which individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when others are present. The greater the number of bystanders, the less likely it is that one of them will help. And several factors contribute to that, including ambiguity, group cohesiveness, and a diffusion of responsibility that reinforces a mutual denial of the situation's severity. Let's pretend that the cows, however, are educated, and they realize the potential problems that lone calves may encounter in designs like that. These cows realize that they want to do things in a way that saves the majority of their herd, not just always doing things that are the quickest and the easiest. The cows understand that they need to be clever. After all, they don't want to end up like the sheep on the farm. Sorry, sheep farmers. The cows know how effective a cow circle can be, so they start to imagine the amount of calves that a very large cow circle could protect if it was ever able to organize itself and function as efficiently as a small one. And even though it may take work, imagine what may be possible if they were able to understand, organize, and use skill sets of larger and larger quantities of cows. After my sleepless night picturing my cows, I decided to present these stories to the oncology staff where I work. And as a result of hearing about these cows, we decided to very quickly try to come up with just a few words summarizing the skill sets for every single person we work with, even those not routinely encountered. It started to make us think about all of the people important in protecting the vulnerable population. To this day, some of our staff still have those comments. So we thought about things like pharmacy, lab techs, hospital volunteers, social workers, advocates, etc. And we started to think of ways to tap into resources that may have been behind us rather than beside us. Some of the skills we noted may have seemed very silly. For example, excellent baker may not have seemed relevant to providing the best patient care. However, when a nurse or doctor had been up all night with a sick child at home and they drugged themselves to work without breakfast, the extra muffins brought in by that baker may have been the defining factor that improved patient care in that circumstance. And ultimately, we discovered that nothing was trivial anymore, and we could find ways to optimize the unique skills of each person. We learned we could form a circle when needed, and we could get pretty slick at shuffling and spinning it too. I've been pondering, what might happen if we started to embark on small talk with colleagues? What could occur if we chatted on the phone once in a while? Now, recently it's been suggested that there may have been benefits to the doctor's lounge after all. Does part of being highly efficient involve being selectively inefficient at times? Sometimes I'm left to wonder what might happen if we tried to learn one new thing about someone else at work every day, even if it was just their name. So the relocation of our clinic has still never occurred. I was told that the logistics were simply too complex to accommodate everything we would have needed to provide satisfactory patient care. And like the initial cows with the coyote, I suppose that potential threat dissolved before it ever became a real threat after multiple people put in input. But now today, we continue to be faced with ongoing adjustments and stress at work. I hope we always remember how to adjust and spin our circle. And I also hope we're creative and we can spot pigs when needed. So ultimately, these stories are not meant to represent any one specific event in our lives, and the farm animals are not meant to represent certain individuals. I started by saying that we may be swayed to want to act like cows. But in truth, I suspect we all mimic roles of different characters in these stories at different points in time. I only relay the stories because I realize that there is value in being a storyteller. Here's a direct quote from an article in JAMA back in 2001. It said, "The effective practice of medicine requires narrative competence. That is, the ability to acknowledge, absorb, interpret, and act on the stories and plights of others. With narrative competence, physicians can reach and join their patients in illness, recognize their own personal journeys through medicine, acknowledge kinship with and duties toward other healthcare professionals, and inaugurate consequential discourse with the public about healthcare." Now, in the CFP, or Canadian Family Physician Journal, this January, they highlighted the winning story for the Mimi Davinsky Narrative Awards. And Dr. Shirley Shipper, in the President's Message column, wrote about a resident physician who had worked with her in the past. And she stated, "Because this resident was skilled, he took less time to figure patients out." Well, one thing that set him apart was that he focused on patient stories. He would often ask, "Would you tell me your story? What makes you who you are? And what's keeping you up at night? What should I know to be a better doctor to you?" Dr. Shipper went on to comment that sharing our stories as physicians can be powerful. So, narratives may not only help patients, they may help all of us. I believe there are lessons embedded in these stories we've heard today. Lessons about how to work effectively with one another, lessons about empathy, lessons about how to adapt, and lessons about how to be creative and think. I'm not going to pretend to know how to remedy all of these current strains at work. After all I've done is observe some cows. However, remember, there is a quote, to acquire knowledge, one must study, but to acquire wisdom, one must observe, which was from Marilyn Vos Savant. And I'll end it all here. Thank you.